Good day everyone, my name is Navneet Anand from aajKal Local and Global. Today we would be talking to Leader of Opposition New South Wales, Honourable Jodi McKay.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here. Really happy.
You have had two stints at NSW Parliament, I think 2007 to 11 and then 15 onwards.
That's right, yes.
How do you see yourself different in these two terms?
Well, I think I was the member for Newcastle in 2007 and I lost that seat in 2011 and I never thought I would go back into politics, so I moved to Strathfield to that electorate and I was still heavily involved in the party, and of course they then asked me to stand in the community that I was living in and I said yes. But my experience in Newcastle was very different to that in the Strathfield electorate. So the Strathfield electorate is very multicultural. I represent a very diverse community. And in Newcastle, not so. It's also very much I won't say industrial, but it's got a strong industrial past. And so that's also very different from the electorate I represent now. And obviously I lost my seat in 2011 because I reported corruption through the Independent Commission Against Corruption, and I paid a fairly significant personal and professional cost, but obviously I felt very strongly about that, and now I just am grateful to represent the great area of Strathfield. But if you had said to me that one day I'd be the leader of the Labor Party and the opposition leader, I would have said that just is not going to happen. But I'm very, very privileged to have this role.
You know, with the two electorates that has been fundamentally and substantially very, very different in terms of demographics, you've told me the difference, but how do you adopt these changes?
Well, I think it's about recognising that when you are representing a community, you're part of that community. So, for instance, with my community now, I've got a really significant multicultural community. So, a quarter of the community in the Burwood area are Chinese Australians. I've got a big subcontinent community, obviously, in the Strathfield area. Within Homebush West, it's a growing Nepali and Vietnamese community. So, it's really, for me, about engaging and immersing myself in that. So, I think that if you were to say to me, how does it compare with Newcastle, I would have to say that I very much enjoy representing Strathfield for that reason.
Have you seen any of the fundamental change during that time in which the politics is now and what it was 10 years ago?
Yeah, I have. I mean, I think that obviously we were in government when I was a minister when we were in government between 2007 and 11, so I held I think 8 or 9 portfolios during that period. But I think that during that time there was certainly things that were going on in politics that weren't appropriate, and I called that out and I appeared before the Independent Commission Against Corruption. And now I guess I'm seeing in some ways a return to that. I'm seeing behaviour that I don't like. I think I feel very strongly about proper conduct and government standards within government. It's always something that I'm going to advocate for. But yeah, I mean, back then it was a very different world. You know, now we're also coping with COVID. We've gone through bushfires and drought, so enormous challenges as well. If you look at the difference in the economy and the community, but in terms of politics, I think that sort of, I fear that we may drift back into those times, and so my job is to fight for integrity in politics in particular.
Now, you've been visible very much with the South Asian community. I could see most of the function you were there presenting yourself. Have your understanding about the communities changed over the period of time?
Yeah, very much so, very much so. So when I was in Newcastle, I didn't ever wear a sari, and I've become very accustomed now to wearing, the traditional dress, which I love. And obviously the community really respects that as well. So whenever I tie a sari, I do it myself, but I'm also aware that the aunties are always watching as to how that sari is tied or whether it's tied the right way. But look, I think for me, I just love, I love my Indian Australian community, my Tamil Sri Lankan, my Nepali, Bangladeshi, you name it. I just love being a part of it. And I also very much believe that when you are a leader of any political party, you are a voice for diversity and a voice for equality. And so I apply that to everything I do as well. In this state has access to good education, good health care, that the services they're receiving, no matter where they are the same. So, yeah.
I just want to take this opportunity to say thank you so much to Harish Velji for giving me a chance to sit
Oh,
with you.
Harish, yeah. Oh, no, Harish has been fabulous and he does such a terrific job in the community, and I'm equally appreciative. So it's been, we are a strong party. Harish has been a long member of our Labor Party, and we're a party that is, we stand up for social justice. We're a party that, as I said, that believes in equality, that believes in access to education and healthcare, believes that we have a responsibility in rural and regional areas as well, not just in Sydney. There's a fundamental difference, I think, emerging in our philosophy as a Labor Party as opposed to theirs. If you look at what happened today, just this week, so we've seen the Treasurer come out and just cut the pay of 400,000 public sector employees with no reason, and it's certainly not COVID or recession related because it's a long-term position he's taken. For us, we want to see a strong, robust, engaged public sector that feels valued, and they've obviously worked really hard in these challenging times, and I think we've seen that particularly during COVID and the bushfires.
The other gentleman I want to say thank you to is Varun Tiwari, who has been catalyst in having these videos done. You have seen him at different...
Yes, I have. He's so active, and wherever I go, he's there, and people respect him, and just the fact that there's a recognition that we need to be able to reach people in different ways. So, a lot of people just don't watch the news of an evening, or they don't read the paper or listen to the radio. So there are a whole lot of medium that we need to be able to engage with, and he does that really well.
Well, thank you to Varun Tiwari and Tarun Yadav for having all these videos done for me as well. During this pandemic, what we have seen is in the initial days when international students were going through very, very hard time, and you were critical of the situation that the kind of help being offered to those people.
Yeah, and I still am. I feel really strongly about the lack of support for international students. That industry is worth about 14 billion in New South Wales. It's a really important contributor to our economy, a really healthy economy. But of course we've seen students who can't come here to study, and those that were here that couldn't leave. And we saw JobKeeper and JobSeeker, but unfortunately that funding didn't go to anyone who was on a temporary visa. So whether you were a student or actually working here, you didn't receive government support. And that really hit our international students in particular. And so for me it became an economic issue, but also a humanitarian issue. And if I was a parent in India and I had sent my child over to study in New South Wales, I would be pretty angry about the fact that I'm paying a lot of money, and they'll take my money in the good times, and then in the bad times they will just not do what is right. So I'm just so appreciative that we had so many of our not-for-profit communities, community groups that stepped in. And I visited many of them, providing the food hampers and the rental support. But Victoria as a state did much more than us in supporting international students, and I hope that this sector recovers, but I do think that there has been some reputational damage done here. And certainly, if we're ever in this situation again and I am Premier, I will always look after everyone. It doesn't matter whether you're a citizen here or not. You are paying taxes, and that's really important. With international students, they're paying taxes if they're working, but they are also paying money for their degrees and keep our universities going. And I think that there's a level of respect that should have been applied to them that just wasn't, and there was just no support.
Okay. Not only the organisation, what I've seen is there are some businesses who kept their ethics up. There's a restaurant called Chatka's, right?
Oh yes, I'm visiting.
Yeah. So, those are the people who kept all the international students on the job just to support them as much as they can.
I think you're right, and many of them actually also supported through the not-for-profit organisations. Right. Like I did a lot of visits with the Hindu Council, for instance. There were many businesses in my own area. And I think that they just stepped up where government didn't. And we're really lucky in this country that we have a sense of camaraderie and togetherness in times where it's tough. And that means that you have individuals that step up and they lose money. And you know, when you look at businesses like that, they've gone through their own tough times. They've had to pay money to adapt to the COVID situation. They lost patronage when the businesses were closed. Even now, people still, you know, some people are not comfortable in going out the way they were. So, you know, that's a huge impost on them. And at the same time, they're helping these students. And I just take my hat off to them. I'm so appreciative for everything they've done.
Well, what I would say is 3 cheers to the management for Chepka, especially Hardik and
hip hip hooray, hip hip hooray, and hip hip hooray. I agree.
What is the role of iCare?
So ICAC is the largest agency in government. So it's over $30 billion agency, and it looks after workers' compensation here in New South Wales. So it looks after sick and injured workers, and it's probably one of the little known agencies within government, but has such an incredibly important task in looking after workers and businesses. So it's twofold. It actually takes the business premiums and it keeps them, and if a business has someone who's sick or injured, then it helps pay that person out and get them back into work. But we've seen iCare as the largest agency in New South Wales. We've seen some very bad behaviour. We've seen incompetence and mismanagement of the money that they have and the role they've had. So, for instance, they've underpaid sick and injured workers, about 50,000 of them, $80 million. We've had now the CEO resign, we've had 2 or 3 directors that have left, and we've got a treasurer who is just responsible for all this. He's set up this agency, and this agency has just performed badly. It's got issues that are before the Independent Commission Against Corruption. There have been numerous sort of bad behaviour that's been exposed over time. And, you know, it just misses the point of what it's there for, which is when people are at their lowest, when they can't get back into work, when they're really struggling to pay the bills because work is just not there, they are meant to have this agency supporting them, and instead they've been entirely focused on making sure that directors are paid well, that there are contracts given to family members. I mean, it's just been a really, really awful situation with that agency. And I think it goes to the heart of what's wrong with this government, where their priorities are just so wrong.
Moving on to a different topic altogether, the tolls in Sydney. They're very, very heavy at the moment. Any of the policies from Labour Party that we see, if ever Labour comes back into the government, there will be some changes?
Yeah, so we are in fact the most tolled city in the world, and that is not something we should be proud of. We saw another toll introduced over the weekend on North Connects, which is a road we absolutely support. It's a motorway which links sort of the northern part of Sydney, the northeastern part of Sydney, into the northern part of Sydney into the M2. So it's a 9-kilometre tunnel which we support. But you know, the government has a focus on that over public transport. We would obviously like to see a focus on public transport. But the fact is that these tolls are being introduced on motorways right across Sydney, and they go up at 4%, so not even up at inflation. We have trucks that are being charged triple the amounts. So for instance, the toll on North Connects is well over $7. So for trucks on one way, it's $21, which is a lot of money on a small business. Many of these are small businesses. So, you know, we've indicated that we want to see a toll-free period on a motorway. We've indicated we'd like to see the Auditor General involved in assessing whether this is in fact good value for motorists and the taxpayer. But ultimately, I think that if you have a philosophy which this government has, where you start from how are we going to pay for infrastructure, then you're always going to land on the side of a motorway because the motorists will pay. But if you compare public transport and you compare a motorway, and then public transport is going to win out. But unfortunately, this government looks at, well, we've got a toll over here and that will pay for it, so let's go with that. There is not actually a fair comparison about public transport versus these motorways. But whether we can do anything, My answer to you would be truthfully, it's very unlikely if the contract is signed. So the contract, for instance, for North Connects is 60 years. The contract for West Connects is 60 years. So it's really impossible for us, when these contracts are set behind closed doors, for us to actually do anything to ease the problem for motorists. But it is the situation that people are avoiding these tolls, and then even when the motorists, the motorways are open, people are then using, they're using residential streets, and that's impacting on communities. So tolls are a huge impost. It's a tax on motorists, and we've been very, very critical of this government's approach.
With the amount of development that has been done in New South Wales over the number of years, but at the same time, a Premier has been in news because of a relationship with one of the members recently. What's your take on that?
Well, look, for me, it comes back to where we started in the interview, that I feel very strongly about integrity in government. I feel very strongly about upholding particular standards. Now, if we accept what the Premier has done, then we accept an impossibly low standard of conduct and here in New South Wales. Now, there are two things that the Premier did wrong. The first is that she knew what Darryl Maguire, who's the member for Wagga, as she was in a relationship with him, she knew what he was doing. She knew about the property deals, she knew about the commissions of property developers, she knew about the deals involving the Chinese investors. She knew it all, and she had a duty to report it to the Independent Commission Against Corruption, and she did not do that. She also, like all of us, is bound by a code of conduct for her and for ministers in government. It's called the Ministerial Code of Conduct. And under that, you have to disclose a conflict of interest in a relationship. Now, she was approving, we found out recently, $40,000 in grants for this MP to benefit this Member of Parliament that she's in a relationship with, and she didn't disclose that. In fact, she told no one about the relationship. The relationship went on since 2013, 2014, and all that time, even though he'd been found to have acted improperly by the Independent Commission Against Corruption, even though that misconduct was exposed, she continued in a relationship with him, and she didn't uphold what was required of her. This is not about her relationship, it's about her conduct as Premier. And when you are Premier, you have to do what is right. And she has not done what is right. And I will continue to expose that. I will continue to hold her to account, because I cannot accept that we go back to those bad old days that I was telling you about, and we lower the standard of government and of the Parliament in New South Wales. We have to fight for high standards, and I intend on doing that. Integrity is everything in government.
With what has happened, this particular incident, she's being supported by her party members. What does Premier needs to do to rectify the situation?
I think the Premier needs to resign. I don't think that the Premier's position is tenable. I think that when you breach the faith, as she has with the community, by not disclosing what she knew to the Independent Commission Against Corruption, by not adhering to the Ministerial Code of Conduct, I think her position is completely untenable. You have to, if you are the Premier of this state, you have to abide by all the rules and all the laws, and she has not done that. And we accept an impossibly low standard of behaviour if we accept this. It's my belief that we cannot do that. And she has a responsibility to be, as I do, to lead in a way that reflects community expectations, but also the behaviour that you expect within your own party. I've always acted in a tough way if something goes wrong within the party or someone misbehaves. I've always taken really tough action. And I've always wondered why she doesn't discipline her ministers. And now I know, because the behaviour that she sets for herself is very low, and I just fear that this is a culture that has developed within this government. And I don't care whether the position I take is unpopular. I just believe in integrity in government.
Has the Party taken this issue to ICAC, and do you think there should be an intervention of
Yeah, look, that's a really good question. So this was all uncovered when the Premier was giving evidence against Darryl Maguire. Well, not actually against. It was uncovered when she was giving evidence in an independent Commission Against Corruption investigation into Tarun. The ICAC has the ability to make a finding against her. I think that it's quite possible they will do that. But certainly we've got Parliament resuming in the next 2 weeks, and the Parliament has the ability to make a referral to the Independent Commission Against Corruption. I believe, as I said, both the Ministerial Code of Conduct and her requirement to report corruption, they fall under the Independent Commission Against Corruption Act, and I believe that they are matters that ICAC should be investigating. In saying that, ICAC could very well, in this investigation it's doing, make findings adverse to her anyway.
Coming back to the Labour Party. Labour Party had very, very weak candidates at few of different positions, what I could see. Have you already started looking for the new candidates which can make a difference? For example, like Parramatta, Riverstone, Penrith.
Look, that's a good question. The answer is no, and the reason is because we've got a boundary redistribution.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is every couple of years the Electoral Commission redistributes the boundaries, and that's because in a state electorate you have to have about 52, 53, maybe 49,000, around the 50,000 mark of enrolled voters. Now if you look at Riverstone, for instance, that and Camden, those areas, the number of people there has increased significantly. So they're actually the size of a federal electorate. So the boundaries will have to change. Now the draft boundaries will be out in November, and then the finalised boundaries will be out early to mid next year. So it would be impossible for us to select any candidates until those boundaries are released and we actually know the electorates. Because some of these electorates, one or two of these electorates may even disappear. So we will wait till those boundaries are determined and then we'll act.
You know, I'm looking forward to have some of the subcontinent candidates from one of these areas who have already done the work in the area.
Yeah, look, it's we've got obviously a really multicultural community, particularly in Western Sydney and Southwestern Sydney, and I think it's really important that we've got people that represent their community. But it would be impossible for me to give any commitment when we simply don't know which seats are going to exist, and even what those seats are going to be called. You know, the names of the seats could change, the boundaries will change. One or two of the seats may disappear, so it's impossible to actually know what will happen. But hopefully we'll know definitely by mid next year as to the names of seats, where they are, the margins. So seats that are currently leaning towards the Liberal Party could in fact become more beneficial for us. So it may be a target seat for us. We just do not know.
Look, thank you so much. On behalf of Friends World TV, 3D Times, India Times, Australia, sincerely thank you so much for giving your time up.
I very much appreciate it. It's been a great discussion and I just wish everyone the very best. Difficult times, but when we're all together and we're supporting each other, we're much stronger for that.
जी हाँ, आज हमने की Honourable Jodi McKay से बातचीत और मैं आपका नवनीत. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you very much.
One-stop answer to your Australian education and visa matters. Gemco Sydney. Dream big, achieve big.
3D Times. Be with the times.